The Maidens by Michaelides. Chapter 1. A few days earlier, Mariana was at home in London. She was on her knees, on the floor, surrounded by boxes. She was making yet another half-hearted attempt to sort through Sebastian's belongings. It wasn't going well. A year on from his death, the majority of his things remained spread around the house in various piles and half-empty boxes. She seemed unable to complete the task. Mariana was still in love with him. That was the problem. Even though she knew she'd never see Sebastian again, even though he was gone for good, she was still in love and didn't know what to do with all this love of hers. There was so much of it, and it was so messy, leaking, spilling, tumbling out of her like stuffing falling out of an old rag doll that was coming apart at the seams. If only she could box up her love, as she was attempting to do with his possessions. What a pitiful sight it was. A man's life reduced to a collection of unwanted items for a jumble sale. Mariana reached into the nearest box. She pulled out a pair of shoes. She considered them. The old green trainers he had for running on the beach. They still had a slightly sodden feel about them, with grains of sand embedded in the soles. "Get rid of them," she said to herself. "Throw them in the bin. Do it." Even as she thought this, she knew it was an impossibility. They weren't him. They weren't Sebastian. They weren't the man she loved and would love forever. They were just a pair of old shoes. Even so, parting with them would be an act of self-harm, like pressing a knife to her arm and slicing off a sliver of skin. Instead, Mariana brought the shoes close to her chest. She cradled them tight, as she might a child, and she wept. How had she ended up like this, in the space of just a year, which once would have slipped by almost imperceptibly, and now stretched out behind her like a desolate landscape flattened by a hurricane? The life she had known had been obliterated, leaving Mariana here, 36 years old, alone and drunk on a Sunday night, clutching a dead man's shoes as if they were holy relics, which in a way they were. Something beautiful, something holy had died. All that remained were the books he read, the clothes he wore, the things he touched. She could still smell him on them, still taste him on the tip of her tongue. That's why she couldn't throw away his possessions. By holding on to them, she could keep Sebastian alive. Somehow, just a little bit. If she let go, she would lose him entirely. Recently, out of morbid curiosity and an attempt to understand what she was wrestling with, Mariana had reread old Freud's writings about grief and loss. And he argued that, following the death of a loved one, the loss had to be psychologically accepted and that person relinquished, or else you ran the risk of succumbing to pathological mourning, which he called melancholia, and we called depression. Mariana understood this. She knew she should relinquish Sebastian, but she couldn't, because she was still in love with him. She was in love even though he was gone forever, gone behind the veil. Behind the veil. Behind the veil. Where was that from? Tennyson, probably. Behind the veil. That's how it felt. Since Sebastian died, Mariana no longer saw the world in color. Life was muted and grey and far away, behind a veil, behind a mist of sadness. She wanted to hide from the world, all its noise and pain, and cocoon herself here, in her work, and in her little yellow house. And that's where she would have stayed, if Zoe hadn't phoned her from Cambridge that night in October. Zoe's phone call after the Monday evening group. That was how it started. That was how the nightmare began.